Limits of Civil Disobedience. Part 1. Not all social groups were moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. One such group was the nation's Untouchables, who from around the 1930s had begun to call themselves Dalit or oppressed. For long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offending the Sanatanis, the conservative high caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years. Untouchability was not eliminated. He called the Untouchables Harijan, or the children of God, organized satyagrah to secure them entry into temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads and schools. He himself cleaned toilets to dignify the work of the bhangi or the sweepers, and persuaded upper castes to change their heart and give up the sin of untouchability. But many Dalit leaders were keen on a different political solution to the problems of the community. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorate that would choose Dalit members for legislative councils. Political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. Dalit participation in the civil disobedience movement was therefore limited, particularly in the Maharashtra and Nagpur region, where their organization was quite strong. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into the Depressed Classes Association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Roundtable Conference by demanding separate electorates for Dalits. When the British government conceded Ambedkar's demand, Gandhiji began a fast unto death. He believed that separate electorates for Dalits would slow down the process of their integration into society. Ambedkar ultimately accepted Gandhiji's position, and the result was the Poona Pact of September 1932. It gave the depressed classes, later to be known as the scheduled castes, reserved seats in provincial and central legislative councils, but they were to be voted in by the general electorate. The Dalit movement, however, continued to be apprehensive of the Congress-led national movement. The Limits of Civil Disobedience. Part 2. Some of the Muslim political organizations in India were also lukewarm in their response to the civil disobedience movement. After the decline of the non-cooperation Khilafat movement, a large section of the Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. From the mid-1920s, the Congress came to be more visibly associated with openly Hindu religious nationalist groups like the Hindu Mahasabha. As relations between Hindus and Muslims worsened, each community organized religious processions with militant fervor, provoking Hindu-Muslim communal clashes and riots in various cities. Each riot deepened the distance between the two communities. The Congress and the Muslim League made efforts to renegotiate an alliance, and in 1927 it appeared that such a unity could be forged. The important differences were over the question of representation in the future assemblies that were to be elected. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, one of the leaders of the Muslim League, was willing to give up the demand for separate electorates if Muslims were assured reserved seats in the Central Assembly and representation in proportion to population in the Muslim-dominated provinces of Bengal and Punjab. Negotiations over the question of representation continued, but all hope of resolving the issue at the All Parties Conference in 1928 disappeared when M.R. Jaikar of the Hindu Mahasabha strongly opposed efforts at compromise. When the civil disobedience movement started, there was thus an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust between communities. Alienated from the Congress, large sections of Muslims could not respond to a call for a united struggle. Many Muslim leaders and intellectuals expressed their concern over the status of Muslims as a minority within India. They feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of a Hindu majority. The sense of collective belonging. Part 1. Nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are all a part of the same nation, when they discover some unity that binds them together. But how did the nation become a reality in the minds of people? History and fiction, folklore and songs, popular prints and symbols, all played a part in making of nationalism. The identity of the nation, as you know, is most often symbolized in a figure or image. This helps create an image with which people can identify the nation. It was in the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, that the identity of India came to be visually associated with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. In 1870s, he wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. Later, it was included in his novel Anand Mat and widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Moved by the Swadeshi movement, Abanindranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata. In this painting, Bharat Mata is portrayed as an ascetic figure. She is calm, composed, divine, and spiritual. In subsequent years, the image of Bharat Mata acquired many different forms as it circulated in popular prints and was printed by different artists. Devotion to this mother figure came to be seen as evidence of one's nationalism. Ideas of nationalism also developed through a movement to revive Indian folklore. In late 19th century India, nationalists began recording folk tales sung by bards, and they toured villages to gather folk songs and legends. These tales, they believed, gave a true picture of traditional culture that had been corrupted and damaged by outside forces. It was essential to preserve this folk tradition in order to discover one's national identity and restore a sense of pride in one's past. In Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore himself began collecting ballads, nursery rhymes and myths, and led the movement for folk revival. In Madras, Natesa Shastri published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tales, the folklores of southern India. He believed that folklore was national literature. It was the most trustworthy manifestation of people's real thoughts and characteristics. As the national movement developed, nationalist leaders became more and more aware of such icons and symbols in unifying people and inspiring in them a feeling of nationalism. During the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag, red, green and yellow, was designed. It had 8 lotuses representing 8 provinces of British India and a crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. By 1921, Gandhiji had designed the Swaraj flag. It was again a tricolor, red, green and white, and had a spinning wheel in the center representing the Gandhian ideal of self-help. Carrying the flag, holding it aloft during marches, became a symbol of defiance. Another means of creating a feeling of nationalism was through reinterpretation of history. By the end of the 19th century, many Indians began feeling that to still a sense of pride in the nation, Indian history had to be thought about differently. Indians began looking into the past to discover India's great achievements. They wrote about the glorious developments in the ancient times when art and architecture, science and mathematics, religion and culture, law and philosophy, crafts and trade had flourished. This glorious time, in their view, was followed by a history of decline when India was colonized. These nationalist histories urged the readers to take pride in India's great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under British rule.